My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
I believe that you had a fairly significant election a few days ago. I don't particularly understand the election cycle of the UK, but I'll just quickly tell you how it works here, and you can tell me if there's an overlap. We have a major national election, I think every four or 5 years, I forget now if it's 4 or 5. And that's when you vote for the party / president. And it's a fairly ideological vote. I don't vote in that election. I just cannot bring myself to supporting any of the parties. But in between those national elections, we have what's called a municipal election and or local election, where it's a more practical vote. So you can change who the municipalities are, and that affects potholes and lights and electricity and water and all that kind of stuff. Was this election that you had in the UK something like that?
Yes, and so, but the way that it works here is even more complicated, because most councils, the local elections are basically held every year, and so what a lot of councils do is they kick out a third of their councillors, and so you end up with a third being elected every 3 years, or sometimes there's some other arrangement every 4 years. It's every council seems to do it. There are multiple ways that it happens, but what's often done here is that the local elections, if there's any kind of turnout at all, and for this one there absolutely was a much higher turnout than usual. What you find is that these effectively become referendums for the national policy, because actually nobody really has any idea what happens at a local level and doesn't really care. They do complain a lot about potholes in the road and the cost of council tax and so on, but most people aren't engaged in any way in local politics. It's national politics that counts if they're engaged in politics, or if they're engaged in the sense of even thinking about it. So that for that reason, local elections tend to become a referendum on the government of the day.
So it says here that Reform UK gained over 1,300 seats. Is that significant?
It is and it isn't. My understanding is that they're. I'm going to get the numbers wrong here, but my understanding is that the share of the vote that they got fell from the last time there was from the last local elections, and that was the reason that they got so many seats was as much to do with the fact that there was a split. There were splits in the other parties, between the other parties, because looking at the country as a whole, it looks like the share of the vote they got was actually less than last time. So it's a mixed picture. They're certainly celebrating this as a massive victory, and many people that would be supportive of Farage and his policies are absolutely viewing this as a massive victory. And so but again, this is local elections. So whether
Scotland and Wales included, if I'm correct.
No, Scotland and Wales, that's two separate things, because they were holding inverted commas national elections there.
Okay.
Because they have devolved parliaments. So this is because they have Westminster has gone down this path of devolution and handing certain powers over to you might call it a regional parliament, but certainly since Scotland and Wales consider themselves to be separate countries, they would consider those to be national parliaments. So national from a country point of view and regional from a sort of United Kingdom point of view. And so those were definitely more significant, certainly in Wales, where the Labour Party has been effectively in control of Wales forever. And now they've lost that. So it was quite as much as the story was about the disaster for Starmer, not totally expected. Nobody was surprised by that whatsoever. And now we're into this cycle of whether he will remain as Prime Minister or not.
Now, how much of this is bread and circuses? I mean, what does Reform UK actually mean and versus Tories and Labour?
Not really clear yet. I think one thing to say is that it's probably already clear, but certainly to anyone who's from an audience that's outside of this country or these countries, it's hard to view these processes as anything other than deliberately confusing. The fact that that the local elections happen in different places at different times means that you never get more than a piece of the puzzle to look at one time. So it's really what the media does with it, and indeed what the political parties and the machine does with it. So you can make any of this look like anything, and there's always precedent that you can go back to and say, well, at that point, because obviously the one big comparison is that Margaret Thatcher had a sort of catastrophic local election disaster almost immediately prior to winning a general election by landslide, and so you can cite that, or you can say that it does mean something. So sort of it is and it isn't meaningful. Just I've got the statistics up actually. I suppose on the face of it, what's significant is that Labour have lost 1,496 seats and Reform have gained almost exactly the same, 1,451. As to your question, does it mean that were there to be a Reform? Well, sorry, do you mean?
Well, yes. What is it that they want to reform?
Yeah. Okay.
That's a whole other question.
Yeah, that really is. That absolutely is. I think primarily what they want to reform is people's idea of what it is that a political party might do, and because they have a small number of MPs in the House of Commons, but basically because they're untainted by having held the office of government, they have no track record, so they can't at the moment.
Well, hold on, Charles. Let's just hold on there a second, because that's not entirely true, is it? Because in the last 6 or 8 months, Farage has systematically brought in people that have been in government.
Yeah.
The most disgusting people that have been in government as well, the likes of Sajid Javid, who was vaccine minister during the COVIDocracy, and so on. So quite a number of these disaffected Tories have been brought into the Reform Party to sit on the Reform side of in the Reform seats, and so they absolutely have experience of some of the worst Tory policy that this country's ever seen. So we should keep that caveat in mind.
Yeah, sorry, I did say it's Zahawi, you mean, not Javid.
Sorry, Zahawi, yes.
And in actual fact, who's not a serving MP at the minute, but obviously has joined the party. But yes, as I say, I think the point still stands that because they haven't held a term of office, therefore no one can point to a poor track record or failing to deliver on this, that and the other promise, or saying this and actually doing that, which of course is exactly what particularly the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have for forever. You can always point to where they absolutely failed or lied or both, whereas Reform doesn't have that. So I think at the minute the sort of the Farage ticket is effectively to say, come on, follow me, I'm different. What I say will actually be borne out because we are going to do this, that and the other. Although I'd be lying if I said I'd been scrutinising it exactly closely enough recently, but certainly the big ticket item for him or for Reform has been migration, and this is why both the Labour government and the Conservative opposition, as it's supposed to be, have also been chasing that same football round the park. Farage, I think, has, if you really listen to what he says, he has sort of undermined his own argument, because it doesn't seem entirely clear, I think, unless Mike is going to correct me, but it doesn't seem entirely clear that his banging the big drum about migration is going to be dealt with, because he has, I think a lot of people entered into the reform channel by thinking, sorry, I didn't mean to necessarily use the word channel, but he has convinced people that he will somehow get rid of migrants, or certainly asylum seekers, or people who've come here via irregular or illegal migration. And actually, when he's been pressed on the subject, he said it's simply not practical and that there won't be deportations. I mean, I'm not necessarily criticising him for saying that. I think what he should be criticised for is for leading people to believe that he's going to do one really big thing, only to admit that in actual fact he's not going to do it.
Is he like Trump, but for the UK?
Well, he thinks he is. Mike,
yeah, he considers himself a personal friend of Trump. He absolutely, whatever Trump says, Farage echoes. That's how it has been for the last few years. But the fascinating thing is that the King's speech is going to be on Wednesday this week, and one of the bits of legislation that is going to be announced is Starmer's efforts to reverse Brexit, and Farage is pretty quiet on that. He has been, as Starmer has been making announcements in this direction over the last 6 or 8 months, and really not that much commentary from or campaigning from Farage to get that stopped.
What was Farage's position during COVID?
Again, pretty well silent until the jab story broke, and then he actively endorsed Tony Blair as somebody who would sort of sort all that out, I think, didn't he? Isn't that right?
Quite honestly, I can't remember.
I think he did. I think he called for, and again, so much happened. It is a little bit difficult to be totally precise about details, but I'm fairly confident that he called for Tony Blair to be the sort of, vaccine czar or whatever it would have been called, to kind of grip it and to make it happen. And he was absolutely out there, that ludicrous period where people, people went out into the street and banged pots and pans for the National Health Service, who were busy making videos of them dancing in empty hospitals. But so I don't know. I think, again, Farage, I think he was sort of bamboozled by it, actually, because he was, whilst in the European Parliament, he knew his subject and he knew his audience, and he delivered a very effective campaign. I think of that there can be no doubt. And afterwards, when that was apparently sort of over the line, I think he did seem lost, a bit bamboozled, and certainly what happened next in 2020 appeared to leave him totally speechless, because he didn't, as far as I recall, he wasn't even banging the sort of drum of liberty, because there were two separate things which obviously always get conflated. One is the idea of liberty, and then the other one was is there actually a threat or not? So you've got the, I think this is pertinent because obviously we're talking about yet another cruise ship with a rat infested or whatever. It's what absolute nonsense. Perhaps we'll talk about that in a bit. But he, for somebody who had been talking about the sovereignty of the country, the sovereignty of the population and this, that and the other, it didn't seem to him to be terrifically obvious that imposing nationwide lockdowns and whatnot was completely flying in the face of the principles that he had supposedly been cleaving to whilst in the European Parliament. So that was very inconsistent, and it took a while for him to find his feet. And I think when he did, his line was, right, well, let's get everyone jabbed. So it is kind of amazing that people would see that progression, that evolution of him personally, and then to see the Reform Party spawned from that, and still to think, yeah, okay, here we go. This is he's the one for me.
Is his position on Israel therefore the same as Trump's if he's a close friend of Trump's?
He's absolutely pro-Israel. No, there's no two ways about that.
Yeah, it's
He's
a slippery
pro-Israel.
slope.
It is a slippery slope. He also said on immediately after the conflict with Iran started, I forget what it was terribly awkward, but he said something like, whilst in general I'm sort of anti-war and I don't think we should be going into conflict, this is one that I do believe is right. So I mean, he's all over the shop. He's also, interestingly, with Iran, he is absolutely pushing Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah, to step into the breach and to be the new regime for Iran.
What are your views then on these elections? Is it just moving chairs around on the Titanic, or is there some value that can come out of it?
I think it does give. If we do look at it as a referendum for how people are thinking, then it perhaps has a little bit of value. I mean, from a purely local politics point of view, it's in Plymouth, for example, Labour absolutely was trounced, but because of the way that the election works, Labour is still in control of Plymouth City Council, so nothing will change as far as this city is concerned, and it'll be similar in other parts of the country. As I said, there was a bigger turnout this time than there has been for quite a number of years, and so that is an indication that people are feeling that they needed to make some kind of statement about how the country is being run at a national level. I think Starmer's absolutely had a message sent, but is that going to make any difference? Absolutely not. So if he can survive, from a personal point of view, if he can survive the next couple of weeks and remain as Prime Minister, then the agenda will continue. If he doesn't survive and he is forced to step down, then the Labour Party will go through some kind of leadership election. I don't know how long that would take because, they have a particular way of doing things. But at the end of the day, somebody else will come along, Angela Rayner or somebody will come, Wes Streeting, somebody will come along, take Starmer's place, and the agenda will continue. So it actually isn't going to make any difference to where we're going to be in 3 years' time when the next general election takes place. And then the question is, what kind of general election will that be? Because we don't know whether this country is going to be actually on a war footing by then or not. Yeah. Certainly that seems to be the direction we're heading. And under those circumstances, what kind of emergency powers would we be looking at? So I think the next, this in and of itself, this local election has its interests, but overall, it's not going to really make any difference to the direction that we're heading in at the moment.
And as a kind of buffer, I believe that Starmer brought in former PM Gordon Brown as part of his defence, as it were, from the onslaught that will no doubt come up. But I think, 30 or 40 MPs have asked for him to step down.
Yeah, but he still has a massive majority. So the Labour Party still has a massive majority in Parliament. So 30 or 40 MPs isn't really that significant. We'll see whether that develops or not. I mean, I can't remember her name because I'd never heard of her before. But there is one Labour MP has decided to throw her hat in the ring to say, I want to stand for leadership campaign, and she has, maybe that is those 30 or 40 MPs supporting her. But she's done this not because she's got any expectation of ever winning, but that's in the hope that it inspires one or two bigger names to get involved. So so we'll see what happens. But that is just theatre, and really it's not that interesting or important in the greater scheme of things.
You said earlier that the election at least gives you a little bit of a snapshot into how people are thinking with the quote unquote success of reform. What do you think the UK or the population of Britain actually wants?
That is a very, very good question, because I find it hard to see that the population doesn't want what it's told that it wants. So I don't know if I've made that make sense. But migration, let's say, if you're consistently told that the reason you're not being paid enough, the reason that everything is too expensive, the reason that there is violence, the reason that streets are not looked after, even that there are potholes and all the rest of it, if you're told that the main, if not only reason for that is migration, then that will, I think, have a terrific effect. And I think that's exactly what reform has, in effect, capitalised on. Now, for those immediately assuming that I'm saying that migration is absolutely brilliant and it's the salvation of this country, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that to pin everything on migration, I mean, even statistically, just can't be viable. I mean, that's, I would ask you, if you think that's the case, then where do you stand on climate change? Because we're told that 3% of emissions are somehow doing more than the remaining 97%. And I would say it's sort of, it's similar, which is not to marginalise the concerns of people who do have a sort of first-hand experience of the way in which migration has been both weaponised and indeed had a significant impact on specific areas. And I totally acknowledge that, of course I do. But to say, let's say hypothetically we removed every single migrant, and straight away, where do you actually draw the line? I mean, who is or isn't British in 2026? But if you took everyone away, then what are you saying? That we'd be left with no kind of economic drama, no crime, no sort of environmental pollution? I mean, I'm afraid to say it doesn't really stack up. So, but it's so easy to point to, because with photographs and video footage of people coming over the channel in small boats, and indeed, a totally unverifiable sort of video footage that frankly could be anywhere or any time of such and such sort of odd or inappropriate behaviour being seen by people who are obviously from abroad. It's very easy to paint that picture. And again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's just, are we really saying that it happens to a greater extent, proportionally, much, much greater extent for within a sort of migrant population? And I definitely don't want to oversimplify the issue. But, what I would say, therefore, is what actually falls out of that. People want to live in a country with a functioning economy. People want to live in a country where roads do get fixed and where people can walk the streets without fear of crime or just untoward incidents happening. But it is not as simple as stopping or changing or undoing the migration policy. And absolutely, I would accept that is part of it. And the reason that I accept that's part of it is because one of the ways in which it's weaponised, of course, is it stirs up tensions, and not necessarily just tensions between people who would regard themselves as British and the sort of incoming migrant population. In actual fact, the more serious division is between groups of people in the United Kingdom as to what their view supposedly is on this particular issue. That is in a way far more destructive. But then if you're thinking that and you want that, then I mean, are you really going to give the let's say the government a free pass on what they did from the year 2020, notwithstanding what's happened with regard to the European Union and what's being done? I mean, there are so many other issues. I'm not sure it can be knocked into sort of one or two sentences as to what people want. And sorry, just to go back, because on reform, whilst I remain critical of Farage and the sort of Pied Piper quality that he has, which I think is dangerous because I don't think he's necessarily leading people in the right direction, I can totally understand why people would want to vote reform. And so therefore, what falls out of the local election results, the fact there has been a more or less switch between that number of seats held by Reform and Labour, the indicator, and this is exactly like why I would always encourage people to sign petitions. What it does is it demonstrates exactly how dissatisfied people are with what is happening, and that therefore they do want things to be done differently. And this is Basil Valentine was talking about this exactly on Sunday. This sort of, Labour last Friday's news programme, and this is where we always get to with change, the whole issue around change. Labour talking about the plan for change, and as Mike is always pointing out quite correctly, there is no change. The direction of travel is exactly the same. So when we talk about change, we're actually talking about change for the good. We're talking about change where common decency and values and economic sense actually happens. But I think also the other great element to it, and this is why it is interesting to look at the sort of local pothole level, why on earth does the state, we talk about this quite a bit, but why does the state do as much as it does and have as much control over our lives as it does? Frankly, it should be, in my view, a sort of minor bureaucracy where you are paying it to do stuff for you, not the other way around.
You see, if we look at, everybody earns some kind of salary, and everybody has, roughly 80% of that salary stolen by the state through direct and indirect taxes, and the state is supposed to provide services for that. But where is that money going? It's going to Ukraine. It's going to dropping bombs in Iran. It's going huge quantities of this. It's going to build the infrastructure that we are concerned about with the surveillance and the digital ID and the CBDC and all the kinds of policies that we know that we don't want. And in the meantime, the things that we do need aren't being done. And my question, and I think Charles weigh in on this, is where would we be if the state was taking 5% of our salaries to do a very lightweight job, and we were then able to choose to fix our own potholes and run our own streetlights and these kinds of things, and actually have proper local accountability for the kinds of things that we might want to do on a town or a village or a city or a community level. It shouldn't be beyond the ability of people to organize things at a local level and have responsibility for our own, where our own money is spent. But we hand over so much of our income to this.
Oh, Charles disappeared.
I see that. To this entity that calls itself the state, and it's so that's a pretty.
I've mentioned this before. We've got an NGO here called AfriForum. They have about 320,000 members, and they are privately funded, obviously by their members. And what they do is, amongst many other things, is that they go around into the areas where they have a presence and take it upon themselves to fix the streets, the potholes. They will even mow lawns that have overgrown, just to neaten up everything and to make things look aesthetically pleasing again, and also working. They even went and fixed a dam that had a leak. What they do then is they invoice the government. And the government has no way of turning that down. They have to pay because this is a public service that was done on behalf of them.
But what's the legal basis for that? Why does the government have to pay?
I think it's constitutional. I mean, you're asking a very technical question now. Charles, you've joined us again.
Yeah, so I don't know what happened there.
I think that would be. I would love to see something like that happening in this country. If there was some requirement for the people to be paid back.
Well, I mean, look, to answer your question, it's not cut and dry like I'm making out to be. They go to court and they fight this, and sometimes they lose, but more often than not they win because they're doing what the government is constitutionally mandated to do, and our government is immensely inept, and so if you don't do anything, you end up with streets on which you cannot drive a car because the holes are so big, and somebody needs to fix it. So these groups like AfriForum go and fix this. Basically, they take it upon themselves, they do it on behalf of the government, and then they fight in court to get the government to pay.
That's exactly the kind of initiative that I think we need to see much more of.
But why does it happen here and not there? Is it because we have a very broken infrastructure that people find it?
No, we have a very broken infrastructure. I mean, just driving around the side streets around my house, and the state of the. I mean, even the main road, because I live on a sort of reasonably significant street in Plymouth, and there's literally grass growing on the sides, on the footpaths, on the sides of the street, and so on. Because there's no maintenance being done. There has been no maintenance done for years. Everything now is completely reactive. So if there is a flood, they'll come and they'll clear that particular drain that has caused that particular flood. If there's a stench from the sewers, then they'll come and remove that particular big lump of fat that's causing the blockage. And so on, so that there's no sort of proactiveness about what they're doing at the moment. It used to be that once a month or something there'd be one of those lorries would come around that just sucks all the leaves and so on out of the drains. That doesn't happen anymore until they wait until something has actually gone wrong. And then at some point they might, somebody's house gets flooded, and then at some point they might come and sort that problem out.
I might have this wrong, and it's purely based on perception of, having traveled to Europe and other countries. But I do get the feeling that perhaps because we're in a backward country that has an entirely broken system, that it is incumbent on people to do things themselves because they know that the government is useless and won't do it. Do you think the people on your side of the pond are quite lazy on average and expect the government to do everything?
Now that's a loaded question. I'll leave that one to Charles to answer.
Yeah, I don't think I really have any dramas in saying yes. I do think that's the case, but I don't mean that necessarily to sound like I'm accusing everybody of being lazy. Certainly not everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a generalization.
But no, it is a generalization. But no, I think the point is, and I obviously I don't know what happened to my connection, but I missed something, but I think I know what it was you were talking about. Yes, I think actually where we are on our timeline is probably not far off what you're describing, Jerm, because exactly like Mike articulates, and we see this, I mean, this is well reported, there is an absolute breakdown, not just in public services, but I don't think private services is quite a thing, but what I mean is that private companies are also not conducting the appropriate maintenance and all that sort of thing on their system. So there is a failure in general terms. Of course, there are exceptions. Luckily, there are exceptions. But in general terms, I think this hasn't, the United Kingdom absolutely went through a period where, in general, stuff worked. And the problem with that is that it gives people the sense that will just be how things go on. And of course, that's not right. And another problem with that is that everything then tends to break or fail at the same time, which means you then are in a proper planning nightmare of how on earth do you actually resolve all of this at the same time. You can't. But it is staggering. I mean, I was driving yesterday on a dual carriageway that's undergoing significant roadworks, which are planned to go on till I think the middle of next year, 2027. And what I find completely astonishing about it is that at the weekend, everyone downs tools. Now, I'm not accusing the people that work there during the week of being, oh gosh, so lazy, they can't be bothered to work at the weekend. That's not what I mean. I mean, whoever owns that infrastructure project should be running it round the clock. So exactly like the way in which the National Health Service or the police work, you organise a shift pattern that means that you can staff that the entire time. And where it means you have to close the road because you can't allow traffic through, fine, you just tailor that around when the volume of traffic is at its lowest for minimal disruption. I mean, it's so straightforward. Yes, there might be a higher cost to it, but the thing is, in delaying consistently, and actually, sorry, I should prefix this by saying I don't believe any of this should be happening in the first place. It's an absolute disgrace what they've done to that bit of countryside. That's slightly by the by. But the point is, if you are going to do these things, do them properly, for goodness sake. And yeah, it's so easy to say, oh, well, just look at China. Well, actually, yeah, just look at China, not just in China, but where China conducts infrastructure projects anywhere else in the world. I mean, they would just laugh at what we're doing. And I'm not just the Chinese, but frankly, anybody who's got any sort of grip of the way in which you should manage a system that is already in existence, or indeed manage the delivery of something that isn't yet. And so, yes, lazy is exactly the right word, but not sort of intentionally lazy, just, sitting there on the sofa smoking fags and just can't be bothered.
Could it be entitlement?
It's sort of that, but it's a passive thing. I don't think people feel actively entitled. I think there's been a degree of comfort. And of course, actually, one thing that we should clarify, of course, Mike talking about earning a salary and the government immediately taking at least 20% of it. Actually, of course, it's far more because of national insurance and all the other, hidden taxes. And so in actual fact, you end up with virtually nothing. But of course, and again, I have to choose my words very carefully, but the welfare state now supports an absolutely enormous percentage of the population. So even if you do work and even if you do pay all of your taxes and this, that and the other, there are still a huge number of people needing to be supported by that because for many, many reasons. For some people, of course, that is absolutely necessary and justifiable, although I would say very regrettable that these things aren't dealt with at community family level. But sadly, the way that society has gone and we are also isolated and separated means that I do believe there is a requirement beyond that. But otherwise, there is a huge amount of effectively spare labour that is not being utilised. And a part of that will be people who have been brought up in such a way as to consider that that is not part of what they do. They don't enter the labour market and they can still have an existence that is actually comparable with people who are working and are earning money. Now that to me is completely and utterly wrong. And I think wrong, but I would say sort of, this might sound a bit judgmental, but I think wrong for the individuals to feel that that's okay if it really isn't entirely necessary.
There's another aspect to this as well, Charles, and that is that people have an expectation that jobs will be made available for them, and this is something that has been a problem for many decades, where we've gone through these periods of relatively high unemployment and people sitting on benefits waiting for a job to come along or for the economy to improve so that there are more jobs. I absolutely applaud. I mean, just to go back to Jerm's organization in South Africa that's doing some of this repairing at a local level and then charging the government for it. Of course, there have been one or two relatively famous cases on YouTube of people doing that in this country. Not very many, but it does exist. But they haven't taken it to the point of trying to recover the cash for that. But there's so many people sitting, particularly young people in this country sitting, described as being economically inactive at the moment. And I'm not seeing any kind of entrepreneurial spirit, any kind of, well, what am I going to do in my life? And can I build a little business or find some way to generate some income for myself, or groups of people getting together and doing this? I'm just not seeing that. And maybe it is out there. I don't know, but it's certainly not obvious if it is. It's depressing in some ways that people are happy just to sit and be depressed actually themselves and not have any interest in being creative and finding some way to generate some form of business for themselves.
Yeah, just to be fair though, the group that I was talking about, AfriForum, as I said, they've got about 320,000 members, so they do have a resource base from which to work. If you only have 100 members, you're going to struggle to take on the government, particularly in court. So you do need to have that infrastructure that has been birthed, I suppose, by its membership base. So they do have that advantage. But I think many other smaller groups are going to struggle to successfully fight the government on these matters. But I mean, I think the motive.
Okay, but if they're a group of people who's got together and they've managed to build a membership base of 320,000 people or whatever it happens to be, if it can be done there, it can be done here. I mean, yes. that shouldn't be an impossible thing to do. It requires a bit of organization.
But just to turn the mirror around, that's not to say that South Africans are not lazy either. I mean, we have what's called townships. What's the equivalent? Squatter camp, shanty town, I think would be the equivalent. They are more often than not filthy, and they don't look after those areas at all. And one might say that they're lazy and they're waiting for the government to fix everything. But what I'm talking about nonetheless occurs here. It just depends, I suppose, where in the country you are. But it still is, in a way, a sense of humility when you know that the government is too useless and completely inept. And so you need to do it for yourself. You have to, you need to become self-reliant. And in some ways, that's a good thing, Mike.
I think it's a brilliant thing because it builds community, it builds friendships, it builds, everything that's done under those circumstances is improving everybody's lives. I'd love to see much more of it.
But it is also a cultural thing. I mean, are British people going to do that?
Well, as far as I can see, there's a choice. We either continue to live in an increasingly collapsing society, or we choose to do something about it. If we get ourselves organized and refuse to pay tax to the central government, that's going to get their attention very quickly.
Yeah, I've also wondered that.
People, we have all forgotten where the power actually lies, and it's only a matter of determination and determining that we are going to behave in a particular way and do it together. But once again, we have had another big march over the weekend. In this case, a march against anti-Semitism is how it was described in the BBC. It's quite amazing how the amount of BBC coverage that this particular march got on Saturday, whereas lots of other marches, the pro-Palestine marches or the anti-COVID marches that happened in 2021, 2022, these got zero coverage, pretty much in the mainstream press. This one has had a host of coverage. But that issue is one that has been used over the last 3 or 4 years to absolutely divide society, and of course, because we're divided in that way, it becomes difficult to get organized to do things. But seems to me that it shouldn't, as I say, it shouldn't be beyond us as humans to do that.
Yeah. I would
wonder
totally
though-
agree.
Sorry, go on, Charles.
No, I mean, all I was going to say, it's similar to what I was saying about the timeline. You know, South Africa, I think, is just further ahead in terms of the breakdown of services and whatnot. Also, South Africa, because of its size relative to population, has more what we might describe as remote communities where people have to have a degree of resilience or sort of self-reliance, in general, more than people in the United Kingdom do, which is not to say there aren't remote communities here. Of course they are, but I think they're interesting to look at because by and large, those are the sorts of places where stuff does still get done and it just goes sort of unreported. But no, I mean, I suppose all I was really going to say was a slightly sort of anodyne point, but all of this is cyclical. I can't really consider anywhere that would describe itself as being part of the developed or developing world. In other words, somewhere that is kind of in touch with the rest of the world. So I'm not talking about societies in the, those that luckily have not been destroyed by everyone else, but say, in the remote parts of the Amazon basin or whatever. But where has not had this sort of thing? We just go through peaks and troughs, and I think the reason that you start to come back out of that is because you go beyond that tipping point where enough people have in effect had enough and realise that no longer can they just look to the district council or the county council or the government to sort this out. They've actually got to get out and do it themselves. And from there, that's how you build upwards again. And I think that I would hope in the United Kingdom, we are quite near the bottom. We've been going down a pretty steep downhill slope. And I would imagine that we must be pretty close to the bottom of it, which means that people
I would say that's absolutely right, Charles. But it depends on whether whether the frustrations that come along with the collapsing infrastructure around them and so on are channeled towards further self-destruction in the sense of conflict within communities.
Yes.
Or whether that can be channeled towards a more positive outcome, and I think that's where we're in a particularly dangerous situation at the moment. That people are ripe for significant civil unrest and civil conflict, and that would be a disaster. But I think unfortunately, lots of people are at that point, and that's tricky.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's a very well interjected caveat. That is absolutely very significant. But one would hope that if you do perceive yourself to be on a side, I mean, once you've acknowledged that no one has got any food, water, or electricity, it really is time to think differently. But we just have to hope it doesn't come to that. But I absolutely acknowledge, and this is why actually that ties in exactly with where we started with what is Reform doing and where are they going, and if they're not going to be a divisive force, then they really need to make a big effort to show that that's not the case. Because the problem with a lot of this is I wouldn't describe it as being positive politics. I mean, I don't know whether there is really such a thing, but no one really ever has a vision of what we are going to be. It's always what we're not going to be, what we're not going to do, what we don't want. And no one from that really gets a sense of, okay, so what are we going to do? What actually happens? And I think that filters down to the individual level. People are very good at whinging, but not so good at coming up with the, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do this. That'll sort it out. Would you like to help me do this?
But that's why I've always found it funny when I've been accused of, shilling for China, etc. Because in many ways I love the way they do things, but I really appreciate our broken society. Let me rephrase it, our broken government, because it actually compels you to do something. It makes you less lazy because you know that they're not going to come and save you. You know they're not going to come and fix the road. You know that the lights are going to stay off in the streets unless you get some action going, and you need to actually make things work in order for them to work. You can't just sit back and moan, because everything around you will collapse. It's just the nature of living, in a third world country. And I like that. When I see the elections rolling out, and we end up with parties that are all working together and merging and all that kind of stuff, it leads to gridlock. And I argue that that's a good thing, because a gridlocked government means that the government can't really be effective. And I don't want an effective government, actually. Well, I mean, that's the honest truth, because an effective government led to mandates during COVID. An ineffective government led to fewer mandates and less top-down imposition on society, because people just went, nah.
Well, I think that's such an interesting element to it, because, as if it's not offensive enough to be robbed of all your taxpayer money that then gets, chucked at Ukraine or whatever. Or, I mean, I'm afraid to say, I'm going to say it, the National Health Service, which is a complete disgrace in every respect. That's probably a bit of a big grenade to toss into the conversation at this point, but nonetheless, I think it has to be said, because it is one of the absolutely gargantuan problems that no one really ever wants to confront. But to say you've not only got that, you've got the taking all your money and effectively pouring it down the drain, but then the same government having the temerity to say, well, now you need to go and get a digital identity, or now you need to go and shut yourself indoors because a rat might come and bite you, or whatever it is. I mean, it's absolutely incredible that people will tolerate being treated like that, and somehow still fork out to be treated like. I mean, it is amazing. I'm not saying therefore that it follows that, oh well, if the roads were looked after and suddenly all the potholes disappeared and the government got its accounts in order, so then it would be absolutely fine for them to tell you to go and wear a mask and get a digital ID. It wouldn't. It never would. But it's just when you add that on top of the way in which they are already handling the situation, it is perfectly incredible that people will still sit there and take it.
I mean, another good example.
Because we've fallen for the Jerm, we've fallen for the rhetoric that is coming increasingly from governments, that the first role of government is to protect us. Yeah. And it was interesting, Charles, that you used the term resilience earlier on, and you were speaking about it, of course, in terms of personal or community or family or whatever. But of course, the term resilience is something which is appearing at the city, the national government level, because and it's how resilient is the state. They don't give a damn about the resilience of us as individuals. They give a damn about the resilience of the state, and how capable is the state of dealing with what the state would consider to be emergencies, whether that be some kind of public health emergency, or some kind of civil unrest, or something which is a threat to the state itself. I think we need to reorient ourselves in the meanings of some of these words and how these words are being used. I think that's an important thing for us all to do at this point.
Just an anecdote, a local example of an ineffective government. If you get a speeding fine, let's say in China, you have to pay it. You're not really going to get away with it. I don't know how it is in the UK. In South Africa, me and many others that I know haven't paid speeding fines in 15, 20 years, because the systems are completely broken. And in actual fact, local courts have ruled that we don't have to pay them, because the central government hasn't been able to effectively apply consistency in the way in which they enforce traffic rules. So they themselves have broken the system, and as a result, it's completely ineffective. And that means, I'm not saying you go around racing, but what I mean is that the system doesn't work. And I don't know about you, but I don't like paying speeding fines.
Well, nobody likes paying speeding fines, that's for sure.
Yes, exactly. But an effective government will mean you will still have to pay, even if the government is acting in a bad way.
Yeah, so South Africa sounds like a great place to live.
It has its ups and its downs. But that's the point that I was simply making. Sorry, Charles, I'll let you continue now. I was just saying that I prefer an ineffective government. So I like it when it's gridlocked.
Well, I think, and I have to caveat this very heavily at the start by saying this is not advice. This is not lifestyle advice. This is a sort of an amalgam of anecdotal evidence, I suppose. But what I would say, certainly having been on the inside of one of them, the systems that we have to supposedly make stuff happen, and by the way, that was the police, they are absolutely creaking at the seams, and they only really work if people engage with them. And I always found it fascinating to see how many crimes, when an allegation is made or something happens with police, it's referred to as a crime or crime report. It doesn't actually necessarily mean that a crime has occurred, but for it to be investigated, it's called a crime report. I was always amazed by how many of those just dropped off the list simply because there was absolutely no engagement from the person who was designated as the suspect. So I'm talking about something sort of low grade, so this might concern, as you say, a traffic offence or something. And if the person just never responded to anything, effectively it just timed out, and that was that. So
but that's exactly correct.
Absolutely, it required a disproportionate amount of effort to try to push this through, to try to make it happen. And of course, the reality is that if you are a response police officer, to vary by force, but you will have an absolutely enormous queue of jobs which are necessarily prioritised, and it is virtually impossible to keep track of all these things. And that happens exactly on the civil side as well. So whether it be sort of parking or this, that and the other, if there's no, and people do testify to this, or low emission zones or any of these things, if there is no engagement with the system, then it is very, very, very difficult for them to pursue you and know that it's going to be worth their while. And as I say, this is not advice, but I do hear from a number of people that this is absolutely the way of it. And again, to go back to the police, the idea that a police force can actually prevent something from happening if enough people are determined to do it is a farce. It's absolute farce. And I'm not talking. I'm really not talking about anything sort of bad happening. People deciding en masse to behave badly. I just mean to behave in a way that, at the moment, the government doesn't seem to necessarily want. And the enforcement tools at their disposal are really figments of media portrayal and the imagination. It doesn't actually stack up. But the problem is that we are, as a society, it's part of this sort of comfort thing, I think, in considering that everything is as it's supposed to be and it's all these systems work and they're all there. It's a complete illusion, but what it has engendered is an incredibly high degree of compliance.
Yes,
and
well, I mean, that's what I was talking about.
That only needs to change very, very slightly for the picture to look completely and utterly different.
Exactly right.
And that is what I always hold fast to. And I find, my own personal experiences, having seen, inside what I mean, in my case, particularly in the police and the armed forces, to see the point beyond which the stretch is no longer possible. People always talk it up, and this is only really ever with sort of overseas deployments. We'll just make do. We'll just grab our kit and go, and it'll all be all right. And okay, it's never always all right, but that can be said. Perhaps if you're considering some sort of ill thought out foreign intervention, terrible idea, shouldn't happen, should never really have happened. But I'm talking about stuff that's going on in this country. When you consider the numbers of people involved versus the population, it's no contest. And really all that needs to change is just a little bit of a swing towards people who just want to do stuff for themselves and to get on with that. And there's not really an obstacle in that path, I don't see.
Just quickly, what happened here, it's related very much to what you just said. One of the local courts found that unless you physically sign and accept the traffic violation from the police officer, it's largely going to be considered null and void because there's a lot of corruption within the police. And as a result, the court found that it would be unjust for police to issue fines via email or SMS or whatever, because you can simply do that in a corrupt process. And they said, no, you need to physically sign for it. And if nothing happens within 2 years or something, it just simply falls away. And that's a great thing, because it shows how broken the system is. And I like that. Anyway, okay, I see we are out of time. Mike, Charles, it's been a pleasure. I'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerm.